Hi, friends. Welcome to Beautifully Bookish Bethany. Tonight, I'm here with actually one of my favorite authors, Nghi Vo, which I'm very excited to talk about her newest book, City in Glass, and some of her other books as well. So thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. If anybody watching has been on here a while, you've probably heard me talk about her books. If you want to introduce, I guess the book, how do you pitch this to people?
Well, there's how I pitch it to people, and then there's how I pitched it to my agent, which was its own whole thing. But while I was writing it, it was called 300 Years of Grief in City Planning. There is a demon who loves a city. There's her city, which is unique and beautiful and beloved, as all cities are. There's the angel who destroys it, and then there is what they do after the city has fallen. It's a story about the end of the world and what happens after the end of the world, because there's always an after for the end of the world.
Hmm. Yes. And I think you said in your notes at the end of this that you pitched it to your agent differently.
Should I talk about that? I don't know if
You
that's
can.
okay. All right. It depends on how much swearing I'm allowed to do on your
It's
podcast.
fine.
So
It's
I think
fine.
we're all good. Yeah. Okay. So this book was written in 2020, and I had just gone off writing The Chosen and the Beautiful, which was my riff on a very queer, very demon infested Great Gatsby. And I'm already just a little bit nuts, and my sister's gotten married, and I'm back home finally from Vegas, and I get on a call with my agent, and she's like, "So what have you got? What are you working on?" And I'm like, okay, Diana, how do you? I want to run this by you, okay? And she's like, all right. And I said, have you ever wondered if you can fuck a library? And there's this deep silence from the other end of the call, and almost like I'm afraid I've lost her. I say, the answer is yes, in case you were wondering. And she's like, okay, yeah, go ahead, go write that. And then she made me pitch it to my editor in the exact same way, so it couldn't have been too bad, but that was a very quiet pause on her part. So
Something she hadn't heard before. I thought that was really funny.
I don't know if it's a good thing to constantly tell your agent. It's like, make your agent say things like, okay, that one's new, that's new for me, we'll see what we can do there.
I mean, hopefully, if you have the right agent, it kind of works out.
It's very important to get the right agent. I definitely have the right one for me.
That's good. Cool. Okay, so like looking at my City of Glass question. So I know you, as you said, you were writing this during the pandemic, and I did think it was really interesting reading this because you've got these long time scales, the death and rebirth of the city from the perspective of an immortal being, which is interesting. So how do you feel like this being during a pandemic influenced the themes that you were interested in exploring?
Um, I wrote this book when I was very alone in my apartment. I didn't get to see my friends for a long time. It was just me and a little cat whose questions I can never answer, except for the fact that he's thrilled that I'm home all the time, which was definitely a comfort. Um, so the way it worked for me was, this was a story that I was alone for a lot when I was writing it. Usually I like to write, in various places throughout the state I live in my friends' homes, on buses, in museums, things like that. This book was almost written entirely contained in my house, and it made me think a lot about the places I would love to be visiting, and the places I would love to go, and the places I couldn't go at the moment. And also the very real fear that when I made it back to those places, as I knew I would eventually, would they be the same place? Would I find them entirely changed? Would they still be my places? And the answer is, even if I had just gone one day and then gone the next, they would be changed. That is the nature of the places we love and the people we love. They change, and we have to be willing and able to roll with that as best we can, or to at least make the change part of how we love things.
Mhm.
But writing it was fun. It was hard. I think this is the hardest thing I've ever written, knock on wood. I mean, I'd like it to be the hardest thing I ever write, but I doubt that's ever, I doubt things are ever that easy.
What was harder about it than previous books?
Um, I knew where it was going to end. and I knew that I had to cover a lot of time. And I will say that one of the first challenges is was the city itself, the city of Azrael.
Mhm.
And there was this really interesting thing I realized where I knew that it's not a spoiler to say the city is destroyed. That's actually on the cover, which I love very much. So the
Yeah.
city is going to be destroyed. And if I was going to make people care about it, if I was going to bring them on this trip of resurrection for a city that doesn't exist, that they've never been to, I had to make them love it. And I had to make them love it in about 5 or 10 pages, I think, is the opening of the city in glass.
Mhm.
And I don't know if I accomplished that. I hope I did. I had to make them love it, and then I had to make them miss it and understand why Vitrine, who is the demon who loves the city so much, is going to spend the next 300 years of her immortal life bringing it back, resurrecting it, making it live again.
Mhm. Yeah, well, and it's interesting too because she is also, you talked about being alone. She is really very lonely through most of this book, even though she's sometimes surrounded by people and in the city, and then sometimes it's just her trying, rebuilding this destroyed city. It's, I don't know. I liked it. But one of the things that was interesting about it, right, is you kind of combine the big picture of these large time scales. Things are happening over years and years and years, but then also these tiny little details, right? It's like the minutia of people's lives and bits and pieces of the city, which is kind of interesting. I think it adds just a lot of richness to how it makes the city kind of come alive. So I'm interested what inspired that. Are there cities you have experience with that you drew on in building this, or history, or how did you do that?
Um, so one of the places where I drew a lot of inspiration for this book was from Italo Calvino's book, Invisible Cities, which Calvino's dead, so I probably am okay spoiling this. But the concept of it is Marco Polo, as a young explorer, tells the Great Khan stories of all the cities that he's been to. And at the end, you realize that all the cities are one city. And I don't love that conclusion. I don't always love it. Um, I feel like every city, just like every person, is unique, and we fall in love with them in different ways, and we hate them in different ways. So the city of Azrael, Vitrine City, is a lot of different cities to me. It's a lot of things I've grown to love about cities. So I'm from Peoria, Illinois, which is this sort of mid-sized town in central Illinois.
Mhm.
And when I was a kid, you could go down to the riverbanks, and there are these areas where it floods so often. The only thing that grows down there are very water-loving trees, right? And back in the 20s, someone decided it was a good idea to build down there, to hell with floodplain access, I suppose. And when I was a kid, I'd go down there with my friends, and there were, at least back in the 90s, these very old brick structures, these brick pagodas that spent like about half the year flooded. And it was the best place to play, and that's part of it. And I mean, part of it is, I wander around my home city right now, Milwaukee,
Mhm.
and I look up and I see that some of the windows around me are made of like rectangular panes of glass about this big,
Mhm.
and they have these swirls in the center of them, and you realize it's bullseye glass. Back when they used to make glass panes by putting a amount of glass on a pipe and then spinning it until it kind of opened up into a large circle, about
Oh,
a really large circle. And then the worst glass was always at the center, which is where the punty was. And there are windows all over my city that have those little panes in them. So
mhm.
it's small things like that. It's the fact
Yeah,
that, we're always building on old cities. How
yeah.
about that?
No, I thought it was really cool. I live in New York, and
Oh, mhm.
and so it's just interesting. You see, I feel like different layers of things on top of each
Mm,
other, and like old paint from buildings that used to exist, built businesses that used to exist or whatever. And so I think it's interesting, and you see like different pieces of history buried in the foundations of the city that influence what it ends up being later on. I thought that was cool.
exactly. We're always among the dead. We're always among ruins, and we live out here anyway. And sometimes we get good hot dogs.
There you go.
I'm sorry. I got to spend 20 hours in Manhattan on my last tour, and the big thing that impressed me was at any point, at any moment, I could be eating a hot dog, and I thought that was just the best.
Or pizza. I mean, really.
Or
Yeah.
pizza. But the hot dogs kept getting offered to me. That was what startled me
That's
a little.
so funny. That's great. So one thing too that's interesting was this book, you have an angel and a demon, but it's not sort of the way we would traditionally see them depicted. And I'm a little curious about the inspiration for that, how you went about creating the idea behind them in this world and why they are the way they are.
Um, the way that angels and demons are working for me in this book is a lot of it comes from my memories of some of the big floods that happened in central Illinois during the 1990s. Those were very impression. Those made a big impression on me because it was the Mississippi River, which is this enormous point of transport and importance to the human civilizations of the middle part of the United States.
Mhm.
And it was the river essentially rising up out of its banks and saying, "Fuck you, you don't own me." And part of it is the fact that angels and demons, like rivers, are bigger than we are. And it's not always the most profitable or useful thing to call them good or evil so much as their actions are harmful or beneficial to us.
Yeah.
And we call them demons, we call them angels. And at the end of the day, there's just the things they do and how we process it and how difficult that can be when they decide they don't serve us, or they're bigger than us, or they're having their fun in some way, or they're on some sort of mission that we can never understand. So it's larger, and story is one way to sort of harness that, if that makes any sense. I just heard myself. I'm not sure I am.
I think it kind of makes sense. Yeah.
kind
I
of, kind
was
of, kind of.
Yeah, no, it does. It's like big picture. Yeah, I think it does.
Hmm.
It's interesting because in the book we learn bits and pieces of more about different demons, but I feel like the angels are left a bit of a mystery, and I kept finding myself curious, what are like what is their deal? Because we never find out much. Do you know what the deal with the
You have, that is the best way to answer that question, because people should always ask me, do you know? We know you wrote this, but I'm like, look, and it's not fair for me to say. It's like, look, I just work here. That worked when I was like a waitress. It doesn't work now, apparently,
right.
according to my editor. I can't just say no. I just work here. That's
Yeah.
my problem now. The thing about the angels is I knew from the beginning they were going to be the vehicles of destruction. They were going to be the flying, talking, sanctimonious end of the world.
Mhm.
And I think that one of the reasons why we never get an explanation for why the angels destroy Azrael is because for a lot of us, we never get an answer for why the world ended. We can guess, we can Monday morning quarterback it, we can suppose, we can curse, we can be angry, we very much are angry, and we can grieve, but most of us never get an explanation for why the world ends. Like,
Mhm.
a lot of the people I've talked to, they know that the world ended and that's enough. The wise, and the wise come later, if they come at all.
Yeah.
And there's just all these people throughout history whose worlds have ended and they never know why. And I think that's part of it for me, why that is just deliberately a little vague. That was on purpose. Sometimes I do things on purpose.
Okay. No, that's good. And I think that makes sense in context with it being so much about grief and loss that yeah, you don't always have answers for why that happens. So that's cool. Yeah. Um I so I guess with this, what do you hope readers take away from this book? And then I do want to ask you about some of your other books.
Absolutely. um okay, so what I want them to take away from the book, if there's any if I have a thesis, it's I hope the book is a fun read for an evening. It is about 52,000 words, so if you're mad at me, you're only mad at me for a few hours. So I've got that going for me. One of the big things I want them to take away from it was that when the world ends, and the world inevitably ends, and if you are a thinking, feeling creature in this time and in this place in the world, you have to get used to the world ending over and over again. Your world will end over and over again. And I think I want them to understand that there is always an after to that. There's when the world ends, if you're still around for it, and chances are good you will be around after the end of the world, you have to decide what you're going to do with it afterwards. Um, I just came off tour last week for this, and someone asked me, what I would tell 16-year-old me,
Mm.
from the distance of being in my early 40s, and I gave my usual smartass answer, and then she revealed that there were actually like real children she wanted to relay this answer to, and I'm like, I think the thing that I yelled in a bookstore was, "Oh my God, the children are real! Who could have known this?" and and I got so flipped out. I took her email and I went back to my hotel room that night and I typed her out a response that was less me being a little prick.
Mhm.
And part of it was, I'm not going to talk about all of it, but part of it was you have to be ready for the world to end and what you're going to do afterwards.
Mm.
And if this book is showing us or teaching any lesson, which I don't teach lessons in my books, I really don't. It's that there's the end of the world. Now what?
Yeah. Oh, that's good. So, yeah, City Glass just came out. Okay, but I have read, I think, almost everything you've
Oh,
written. So,
oh! I hope you dug them.
what?
I hope you dug them. I hope they were
I
a good
yeah,
time
I
for you.
absolutely I love them. They're great. So tour is very good to me and now sends me everything you write. So it's good.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, it's great. Okay, so I have questions that kind of are about some of the other books, about like kind of bigger things.
Mhm.
So one thing that I think is interesting is there, to me at least, reading your novels versus your Singing Hills novellas, they're very different in tone, which I think is really interesting. I feel like all of your novels have this sort of dreamlike, poetic quality to them, which I love. And then the Singing Hills novellas feel so much more kind of grounded, they're more funny, and I'm curious if that's an intentional difference, if they feel different to write, kind of what. Yeah.
No, it's great because I think part of what you're picking up on, which is very perceptive, is the fact that my attention span is about like it's about this short. This is how short my attention span is. And I was in very different places when the novels happened versus when Singing Hills happened. Um, I wrote the first novel I ever wrote and completed was Siren Queen, which is an exploration of a Chinese American actress's rise to fame in 1930s magical Hollywood. There's fairies, there's monsters, and it's a lot of fun. And it came from a conversation I had with my very good friend Grace. She put up with me talking about fairyland contracts in Hollywood for 2 hours. And then I wrote the book. And then I sent it off for a contest. And while I was waiting, they did reject it. They rejected it. And then I'm like, okay, it can go looking for an agent now. And while I was looking for an agent, Tor.com put out a call for submissions. For novellas, and novellas are only 20,000 words, and they were looking for unagented manuscripts, and I'm like, I can write 20,000 words, I don't have an agent. And so I wrote The Empress of Salt and Fortune, which was like originally like it was going to be a poem or a weird art project. I'm like, perhaps it can be a novella, and it was a novella.
Mhm.
And then Roshi Chen, my editor at the time, Tor.com, said, could this be a series? And I'm like, because I like money and because I like recurring gigs, I said, yes,
Yeah, sure.
yes, it absolutely can be a series.
And we're all
And I
very
mean,
happy it was.
it was always going to be something like I was always going to be checking on the main characters from the Singing Hills, Chi and Almost Brilliant. I was always going to be checking on them in my head, but now I had suddenly had the opportunity to write about them and their adventures, and I'm like, oh man, I should put together a wiki of what the world is like. And now 5 books in, I'm finally doing that. So this should have been like 3 books ago easily.
Okay.
So I
That's
mean, the big
really
difference
interesting.
is, it's fun. I'm having fun. And
Mhm.
I'm writing different things, and I'm just sort of chasing down whichever plot bunnies are slow enough to let me catch them.
That's great. It's interesting because I was gonna ask too, because so Siren Queen, I think, is my favorite that you've written,
Oh,
which is interesting that's your first. I love it so much.
oh, I'm so
Um,
glad.
yeah, but I was curious actually where you came up with the this dark fairy world with Hollywood studios. I just think that's so interesting and I love it, but I like where did that idea originate?
It's what happens when you do a lot of reading about classic Hollywood, and you realize how horrible it is, and you start thinking about things like contracts, and you start thinking about things like, I believe it was Rita Hayworth who the studio put through cosmetic surgery to make her less Latina. It's learning about things like how long, like how the studios could give you give you a new past with every movie. Like every movie, they would just give these actresses new histories. And a long time ago, about the time when in the 1930s, we didn't actually really credit movie stars. That took a while because they thought no one would care about the stars, which I think is so fascinating. And mostly came from the contract. It came from people betting their luck on how pretty they were and how talented they were, and throwing it all into the mix against people who do not care about them at all. And that's a lot of creative endeavors, but it started with the contracts. It started with orphans who worked for the studio. It started with reading about Anna May Wong, whose work I love, and also Marlene Dietrich and Greta Garbo. Greta Garbo, who I had a crush on for a very long time. Greta Garbo is actually the inspiration for Greta in Siren Queen, in case you ever wondered.
Cool.
It's just exactly what happens when I read too many books, and I'm like, you know what? I could probably write a novel.
I think it's great.
I'm sorry,
God,
it really is a mess. I want to give you like a more romantic story, but that's literally what happens.
no, it's okay. I love it. This is just me like being curious. I think it's such an interesting connection to make. I mean, I see it because fairy bargains, like I kind of get it, but it's just it's such an interesting like way of creating the world, and it's almost like a fever dream sort of. It's cool.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. People dancing in shoes of blood, that's Hollywood.
Yeah. Yeah, and then with that, I mean, I think that's not the only book where this is the case, but you write often these sort of like fierce, super ambitious women who are like maybe unlikable, I guess is I love them. I think they're great, but I think they're interesting people, and I'm curious, why do you write women like that? And what has the response from readers to them been?
um here's a thing. I People ask me a lot, like, so why are your characters so unlikable? And the thing that comes up for me is, well, it's okay, I'm not likable, and I've done pretty well, I think. um Likability is a very strange quality, and as a very strange child who used to run after other children with bugs to scare them in the on the playground, I maybe am not the best authority on it. What I'm pretty good at is people who are stubborn, and people who want to get their own way, and people who like to have a good time.
Mhm.
And my thesis going into this, which I'm sort of betting like a whole career on it, so we'll see how it works out. But my idea is that you never have to like a character you're reading about, but you do have to understand why they do the shit they do.
Mhm.
Um, you have to understand why Jordan from The Chosen and the Beautiful, or Lily from Siren Queen, why they take the risks they do, and why they can be as cold and as ambitious as they end up being in many cases. Um, and if you're willing to understand them, if you're willing to say, "Oh, I see why she did that," I think that can still be a fun read for folks. Even if you would never be friends with these women, and even if you would never want to be them, definitely don't be them. That's a really bad idea. It can still be a fun way to spend, 70 to 80,000 words.
Yeah. I mean, I have a soft spot for women like that, so I
I'm
just
so
like
glad. No, I mean, don't be friends with them. They make bad friends. They kind of do make bad friends.
yeah. No, I mean that's fair, but I think they're interesting, and I don't know. I think too many people expect women to be nice, and I'm like, female characters don't all have to be nice. It's okay.
We're not all nice. Some of us are kind of assholes. It's a thing.
It's okay.
Yeah.
I mean, no one cares if men are, so
Certainly not.
Okay, with the novellas, right? They're
Mm.
all really different from each other, which it sounds like it's partly maybe that's just kind of what happened. I think it's great though. I love it. You've got like Mammoths at the Gates, which is this amazing exploration of grief and growing up. I just thought it was so beautiful.
Oh.
Like coming home and feeling like you don't fit in that space anymore. And then Brides of High Hill is this gothic kind of horror story. It's just really fun. So how do you decide? And maybe you kind of spoke to this, but what themes or subgenres you want to play with? Do you have ideas for what different things could happen with it?
Oh, absolutely. I even know where the series is going to end if they ever make me end it. So fingers crossed, we will get
Okay.
to that ending. I think it's a good ending. But the way that all of the way that all of the Seeing Hills novellas work, except for the first one, which literally did come from, I bet I could write 20,000 words that someone might like. The Seeing Hills novellas all became this sort of thesis on storytelling and the stories we tell. Uh, the Empress of Salt and Fortune is a political thriller, sort of told in retrospect and kind of sideways. The When the Tiger Came Down the Mountain is my idea of what a love story is.
Mm.
Into the Riverlands is Shenxia, is my take on Shenxia movies. You
Okay,
know,
good.
we were all kind of watching The Untamed. It all kind of got in our heads, and I have a long history with that, with the bootlegs that my grandpa used to watch when I was a kid. Um, Mammoth at the Gates is the stories we tell about the about dead people, the stories that we keep when the person that the stories are about have moved on. Brides of High Hill, that's a gothic.
Yeah.
That's a gothic straight up. And the best part was I was reading some reviews. Some reviews were sent to me, and they're like, "Is this a gothic? Can we have a gothic?" I'm like, "I don't know. We have the haunted house, and we have the lost bride, and we have the monsters in the shadows. I'm pretty sure it's a gothic."
It's definitely a gothic.
So, you know, it's me spewing out everything I believe about why we tell stories and how we tell stories and
Mm,
how we use them to help each other or heal ourselves or hurt other people. And
mm.
it's honestly been a blast. It's been so much fun.
It seems like it. I love it. They're so great. And then, we love Claire Chi, such a great character.
They are
But I
trying
think
hard every day.
what?
They're trying hard every day.
Yeah.
It's a little sad sometimes. They're doing their best.
Yeah. No, it's great. And then, with Claire Chi, with so many, with all, I mean, really all everything you write, it pretty much, I think, you seem to almost always have queer characters in your stories, which I think is great. And I think especially now more than ever, that's so important. We have all of this book banning stuff happening, and so I wonder if you would speak at all to that, however you want to take that.
Um, what it kind of comes down to is the fact that you know, they say write about what you know, and I actually don't know anything about carnivorous fox spirits or tigers that really want to make you their girlfriend. What I do have is a very tight knit group of friends, and we are for the most part queer. We are for the most part marginalized in one way, shape, or form, and it is sort of write what you know, and those are it's there's no direct takeaway from person to character, but I write about the people that I know and love, and I write about the things that we're worried about or the things that make us happy. And what it comes down to is my books have developed a very, I guess you could call it a queer sensibility, but it really just is me and the world I'm living in. You know, I used to volunteer at the Milwaukee LGBT Library, which is actually the biggest queer lending library in Wisconsin. And, you know, that's where a lot of my contacts and a lot of my experiences with life came from. And um, it's just how my life works. And my life isn't, it's not adult. It's not drama. It's not tragedy. It's just my life. And I think that comes out a lot just in how silly and fun and occasionally very sad and occasionally very, very sweet life can be. And if you're seeing that, you are seeing my life. And I guess it's a pretty queer life, all things considered.
Which is great. That's cool. Um, you also have written quite a few stories about Asian characters who are sort of making their way in these very white communities, right? You've got The Chosen and the Beautiful reimagining Gatsby's Jordan Baker as this Vietnamese adoptee. In Siren Queen, the main character, as we talked about, is this Chinese daughter of immigrants trying to make it in Hollywood. In What the Dead Know, you've got an Asian woman posing as a medium in historical small town America. Can you talk about why those themes are important to you to put into your writing?
There is this one bit in Siren Queen where that has never left me ever since I've written it, where Lily, as a one of the few Asian American stars on the big screen at that time, she talks about getting letters from people from the lonely outposts where they don't see people who look like them very often. And there's something isolating about that and something weirdly powerful, because when you're the only person who looks like you get to write the rules on what that means. And then there's the alienation that happens when you enter a community where it is people who are like you and you're like, oh, I don't get to make this call anymore. There is something else I need to fit into. I mean, my family was, I believe, one of 3 Vietnamese American families in my area during the 80s. So that's always I mean, that's certainly a part of it.
Yeah.
And some part of it was also going through the Midwest and seeing signs of families a lot like mine, which are, you know, 1 or 2 families in fairly isolated communities. And that's part of it as well. It's little candlelight fires in a very, very wide Midwestern plain. How about that?
That's good. I like it. Cool. Okay, so then what's next? Are there more novellas? I mean, it sounds like maybe there's more novellas coming. Do you have other things? Have you thought about doing a novel series, or is that like too much?
Oh man, congratulations. You've really picked on why I do or do not do projects. I'm like, can I really last that long? Is that going to be good for all of us? So the Seeing Hills series is going to continue as long as Tor.com lets me do it. I have so many ideas for Chi and for what they are doing and about how they live in their world. This is kind of fun. We're pretty sure the next one is going to be one that was actually written about 5 years ago, I think, but they said we can't publish this because one of the important parts about it is eating a baby.
Oh.
And yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And it would have come out in 2020, I think. And I believe the call as it happened between my agent and my editor, and I have to imagine there were like calls with the 2 of them where they figured out how to break it to me, where they're like, Nghi, do you think this is really what people need right now? And I'm like, I guess not. I'm like, fine, I'll go write another one, which became When the Tiger Came Down the Mountain. Okay. But recently we've decided that maybe the times have changed and we're ready for that. So fingers crossed.
Okay.
Look, but the important thing is not that the baby is eaten.
Right.
The baby is absolutely eaten. You know, there's no way for me to save this. I'm just going to say it's going to be okay. It's that there's another thesis for the Seeing Hills. It's all going to be okay. And the nice thing is that they're all standalone. So if baby eating isn't your thing, you can skip this one. You can
skip it and read another one.
Absolutely. Right. And the nice thing with the Seeing Hills is you can just pick them based on which Alyssa Winnen's cover you like the best. They're all standalone.
They're also pretty too.
Oh my God. Have you seen Alyssa's, have you actually been to Alyssa's art page?
No.
Her art is so pretty and she goes so hard for her original work. It's just fantastic.
Yeah, I'll have to check it out because the covers are gorgeous. They're really
beautiful. No, I did real well with those covers. The first time I saw the one for Empress, I was just completely awestruck. I'm like, oh my God, this is for my story? Wow.
I love that. That's so cool. So I'm curious, like this, you know, you've written a lot of things in a not super long. How long have you been writing and where did that start? Like, because I feel like a lot of people were writing before anything got published.
Of course. Okay, so the first thing that I got published in SpecFic was probably back in about 2004, I think, which is the first story I ever had published with Strange Horizons. But in general, before I've been a full-time freelance writer for about 15 years now, and I wasn't always writing fiction. I was, you know, for my own sake throughout it. But before that, I was writing, you know, vacuum cleaner parts and answering questions on the internet, like how ride bear? The answer is don't. You know, doing like cockroach care guides for very dedicated dubia roach keepers.
Wow.
So, you know, I was okay. I wrote to pay the bills and I wrote to spec, and it's hard to say, I can't really say I was really young and I needed the money, but I did need the money.
That's fair.
So, it was, I've been writing the whole time. And even if I mean, I don't know, I can't predict what's going on in publishing. This has been very new. I've only been doing this for about 4 years or so.
Mhm.
If this gig ever goes away, I'll still be writing. You maybe don't know it's me, and maybe it's about things like, how to raise praying mantises or something, but this is still my gig.
Okay, awesome. Okay, I did have a couple of questions from Patreon. I was
Of
like, does
course.
anyone have things? So, do you have a writing routine? And based on something you said earlier, I'm guessing maybe not, but do you?
I do my best.
Okay.
Um, let's see. Actually, I can say this, and I can say this very honestly. Routines do not work for me for very long. I find a new routine, like, we get up in the morning, we immediately start working, or we do some yoga and then we write for 20-minute increments. Or I've done like about easily in the last 4 years, I've gone through about, we'll say about 10 different routines where I'm like, oh my God, this is me. And this is going to be me as a regular writer. I'm going to make regular work count and be like a normal person. And it never lasts. It lasts for like 6 months if I'm lucky. It lasts for 4 weeks if I'm not. And I think I just have to deal with that, as who I am. Having order is great, but it's not going to save you if your brain keeps fighting it. How about that?
Oh, makes sense. You got to work with what
Yep.
works for you. Yeah. And then the other question I got was, what is your comfort read? Do you have a comfort read?
Let's see. Comfort reads. Um, a lot of things by T. Kingfisher, for a good time, always call T. Kingfisher. Um, I really liked Wizard's Guide to Defensive Baking. That one made me real happy.
I've heard that one's really fun. I haven't read that one.
Oh, it's so good, and it feels right. It's one of the things that feels right to me. Italo Calvino's Invisible Cities. I love that very much. Angela Carter, The Bloody Chamber.
Yeah,
Uh, that feels like home. Like they're fairy tales and they have teeth, and safety is never guaranteed, but it will be pretty.
they're great.
They're wonderful.
Love that. Amazing. Well, thank you so much for talking and answering all of the questions. And y'all go read all of her books, but City in Glass is the new one. This was so great. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. This was awesome.
Yeah, no, for sure. Go check that out, and I will see you all next time.